Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the AIA lecture series. My name is Randy Sovich, and Kelly Dans and I are the co-chairs of the lecture series committee. We're glad that you're here tonight for the 2022 AIA Baltimore and Baltimore Architecture Foundation's lecture series. The lecture series is celebrating its 44th anniversary this year. The series brings nationally and internationally recognized speakers to talk about design in relation to a timely theme, and to draw connections to relevant issues here in Baltimore. On behalf of AIA Baltimore and BAF, I thank you for joining us this evening. This wouldn't be possible without the generous support and partnerships of our sponsors. And on that note, I'd like to thank all of our 2022 Spring Lecture Series sponsors. As a major sponsor and partner, Maryland ASLA, our Corinthian sponsors, Murphy Dittenhafer Architects and Shaw Contract, our Doric sponsors, Blue Ocean, Structura, and WBCM. This wouldn't be possible without their support and the support of AIA Baltimore's 2022 annual sponsors up on the slideshow now. We appreciate everyone's flexibility during this time of pandemic, and we look forward to seeing you all in person very, very soon. Recent events have created uncertainty but hope about the future. How do we transform architecture and design to address rapidly changing needs and demands in our homes, workplaces, and public spaces? The 2022 AIA Baltimore and BAF lecture series has been exploring current trends and changes in local and international work in the design industry as we look to our post-pandemic future. We're very pleased to have tonight's lecturers who will discuss design and community development to create social, economic, and environmental impact in dialogue with interior design and trends evident as we move into the post-pandemic design world. Katherine Darnstadt of Latent Design and Rebecca Jones of R.D. Jones will present their recent work of architecture and interior design work across varying scales. Katherine Darmstadt is of Latent Design. She is an architect, educator, and founder of Latent Design, a practice at the intersection of architecture and community development, creating social, economic, and environmental impact beyond the building, leveraging design as a tool to make the invisible forces impacting a project visible through architecture. The firm's collaborations range from small scale tactical interventions, new construction, community buildings, adaptive reuse, neighborhood master plans, and design speculations. She is the winner of the 2013 American Institute of Architects Young Architects Honor Award, 2014 Crane's Chicago 40 Under 40. She teaches at the School of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago and Northwestern University. Our second speaker is Rebecca Jones of R.D. Jones. Her love and passion for hospitality design and creating fabulous yet functional spaces was a true motivator to establish R.D. Jones Associates in 1996. Rebecca has more than 40 years of specialized experience in hospitality, restaurant, and multi-family interior architecture and design. A true Texan at heart, she received her BFA degree from Texas Tech University and studied at Parsons School of Design in New York City. She spent 12 years working in New York with a sole focus on hospitality before starting her namesake firm. As owner and principal of R.D. Jones and Associates, she continues to set the design, direction, and tone for all projects. In all renovation and new construction projects, Rebecca's experience drives her visually stunning and operationally viable design for essential foundations for timeless design. You can see our www.aibaltimore.com website for more information about each speaker. One last thing before we begin is a little bit of housekeeping. If you would like to get AIA or ASLA credit, you must fill out the form that's available online to get your credit. You were also emailed an evaluation form with the Zoom information. If you have not filled that out, please fill that in. We will do a Q&A at the end. Please use the Q&A box to submit questions. The chat box is for general dialogue. We generally don't read those questions from the chat box. We read them from the Q&A. With that, I'd like to have Katherine share her screen.
All right, good evening, everyone. And thank you for having me this evening. And we're going to talk about this Although the introduction was regarding my architecture firm, Latent Design, one of the pieces that we're going to talk about is about starting a non-for-profit as a response to the last 2 years. And this is a design response. It's a systemic design response, and it's very integral to part of this conversation of what are we seeing as shifts within design community, design projects, both at the the individual practice, the neighborhood, and then also at the city scale. So we're going to try and talk through a little bit of that arc as part of this. As mentioned, every city experienced summer of 2020. And what we experienced in Chicago is probably not that different from Baltimore. We had a range of emotions, of protests, of just random acts of violence, all with that layer of trying to understand what health and wellness and even a pandemic even means on our own soil and context. And for us as architects, there was much of it where there was a lot of always hand wringing in architectural circles on how do we best use our skills, or how can we respond to this? How can we support? Or how do what can we do to help address some of the concerns that we're seeing in protests, address some of the changes that we're seeing in communities, and then understand how our spatial systems and both our workplaces and our neighborhoods just needs to change. Where we went with that is, three women came together. We're friends, we're award-winning professionals, and in the realm of Chicago, where our firms are generally the ones where if a community project or a community member has a project or something that they want to work on that might be at the pre-development phase, or maybe small scale tactical urbanism or placemaking, or even an urban plan that's trying to get grant funding before trying to understand the program before it gets grant funding, they usually end up with one of us in terms of how their connections come together. So El Ramel is one of the directors of Get Cities. Get Cities is a technology non-for-profit started by Melinda Gates, and she's the only non-designer, but she's the one that keeps us the most organized because she is a non-designer. She's been working around city design issues through the lens of policy and tech for the past decade. Paula Aguirre Serrano on the right hand of the screen is a planner based in Chicago and San Antonio. She's one of the she's very well known. She's on the committee, like the Smithsonian committee now, to look at a new Latin American museum on the mall. She was part of, the Young Architects Award in New York. And for her and I, we've worked together both professionally and then in Chicago, specifically around how can we formalize a community design organization? Because at the core, that is what one of the things that Chicago was missing is we don't have a community design center. Baltimore does, we don't. So we've always been trying to get to the level of, of what's happening in Baltimore with some of the neighborhood design organizations that you do have. We just didn't have that finalized and established in Chicago. And one of the reasons that is because we have a very large design community in Chicago who are gracious and loving and well connected. But we followed one of the many ebbs and flows that happens within kind of workflow cycles that exist over decades of running a firm. So if the firm is busy, if everyone's busy, you don't have time for pro bono, low bono, or extracurricular work, community-based work. If it's not busy, then people are, suddenly also available. But how do we keep this even advocacy for community-based design establish that within Chicago, create that organization as a repository for both design resources, design talent, and then support for community designers across Chicago. The challenge we have in Chicago is it is a huge geographic city. So you do end up with pockets of north, west, south, and far south side information and connections that end up being a little bit isolated from one another. And so we wanted to think about how we could start to aggregate that information and that talent across the city, and then create a model that would allow for this new organization to be sustainable long term, because it's not sustainable when it's only pro bono services, when firms have time. It has to be sustainable not only through integration into the planning departments, integration into funders, into long-term funders, and then also through fee for services projects, and bringing those all together. And that's what we did. We were, in 2020, the three of us came together, and we had the incredible opportunity of having a funder right out of the gate who was willing to support a 3-year vision for creating a community design center. That is very atypical. We know that's not the norm. And what it built on was we were already both working in this way as established individuals within architecture and planning. We knew where the gaps were in the city, and we already had very early buy-in from our Department of Planning to support creating a community design center that at first started to look at, joint projects within the planning department that we would be able to grow, support, and execute with them. One of them, they all ended up taking way longer than the original plan was, as most projects tend to do when the city gets involved. But we're working through various types of projects, both looking at, on the left, what happens within physical space, storefront renovation, community, delegate agency and neighborhood organizations that provide city services. What does their space look like, feel like? How do they get a better chair? How do they meet someone from Herman Miller to get that better chair? How can we leverage networks to help them improve their space? So that's a long-term initiative of looking at storefronts and small business improvements in strategic areas across the city. In the middle is thinking through, and I'll show specific project examples for this, is thinking through public space and the reuse of public space, mostly sidewalks, parklets, closing down streets to create temporary public plazas. That became core to a group of work and projects that we're continuing through this year and last year, this year, and into next year, as part of both the Alfresco Chicago program, is how we name it in Chicago. And then, because we have to put Chicago in every title that we name something, it's just mandatory. I don't know why. The Alfresco Chicago program, and then also part of some of the Chicago Recovery Grant programs, which are taking millions and millions of dollars and putting them towards community public spaces at the temporary level. Temporary meaning, 2 to 3 years in terms of duration that it exists, and then hopefully over that time, a more permanent pathway to make that temporary plaza, that temporary public space, exist permanently in the neighborhoods. And then finally, when we look at it, it's not just projects, it's about the process, it's about the systems, it's about creating design guidelines to allow this work to be able to be replicated by different firms, different partners, and in other areas of the city, and including other cities. How can Chicago start to be an example for that? And so we work through with the city around neighborhood design guidelines, because we saw that there was a gap not only in having design services for neighborhood projects, but also making sure that the city itself wasn't creating design guidelines or talking about neighborhood-based design in a vacuum. Because often what we found is some of these documents would be circulated internally or with the Plan Commission or with a small group of professionals, and it would not reflect the diversity of the neighborhoods, wouldn't even understand some true neighborhood context and concerns, because the professionals, the architects, the engineers that might be reviewing it had just never worked in those neighborhoods, didn't know anyone, and just were only, we wanted to be able to broaden the perspective that goes into neighborhood-based design through broadening the review and comment group that goes into such documents that we in turn as architects then need to follow for our own projects. The one most notable one that this process of the Alfresco program started to, that brought to life, was this last year's AIA National award-winning film, AIA National Film Award-winning project called Pop Courts by Lamar Johnson Collaborative. And this is on the west side of the city of Chicago. And how we facilitated this was one of the first public space kind of takeovers that creating that alfresco program and working with DPD to started to think of how can we transform vacant lots, public space, the sidewalks, every surface. How can we even, cover it with paint, with program, with different types of functions? What does that do to create a public space where there was none within a neighborhood? And how does that start to tie in with be a catalyst for other corridor developments that might happen on the block itself? So Pop Courts went in last year, June 2021. It's a 3-year temporary public space that exists there. And now what we could start to see is this space has tied into and spurred other adjacent storefront development for small businesses, other building improvements on the block, because it's become an amenity. Even though it just feels like it's paint and color on concrete, it has really started to shift what the adjacent storefronts, buildings and blocks, how much investment is starting to come onto that block and a few block stretch of that corridor. So we see that it matters. And we see that it matters even at the national level in terms of the awards that it has given to this project and several similar placemaking and public space projects across the country. And so we did it again. We are in the process of launching 3 of these this summer in different neighborhoods, again, because Chicago has such a large geographic spread. The west side is different than the west side in Austin is different than the west side in Humboldt Park. And the south side in Back of the Yards is different than the south side in South Chicago. And so we started to work across multiple neighborhoods and then bring teams of architects together, both large firms and emerging firms, to partner to create new designs on corridors. Some of them are mostly on sidewalks. Some of them are closing down full streets to create new public plazas. And all of them have similar core components of art, commerce, color, and just trying to create, vibrancy in an area where there needs to be more moments of trees, of seating, of opportunity to gather in all of these neighborhoods, because that's what's already happening. It just becomes overly policed, overly it gets a negative connotation that gets associated with this. So we're trying to use these projects as ways to spur business, spur gathering, and bring new life along corridors and show what's possible with different spaces. South Chicago, this is ribbon cutting in 2 weeks. So we took UC part of the paint installation. We covered a whole entire block with painted ground surface that ties together specifically in areas concentrated in front of vacant lots in front of the corridors. And then have a series of new benches, planters, and then kind of structures for market and small vendors to go into along this block. This block has all the storefronts are very active currently with various small businesses. And there needs to be more space because there's not enough space for the amount of businesses that want to go into this neighborhood and onto this corridor. So that's why we started to conceptually concentrate activity in front of the vacant lots so that it doesn't become wallpaper and doesn't become an empty background. So that it could start to spur ideas of how those sites might be able to redevelop, because many of them are owned by the city itself. And so the city also has to see in many of these instances how their own land and their own property can be used in a higher and more efficient manner. And, we're fortunate that within that first year, there's plenty of press that we are able to garner, and that starts to put validation behind why design matters. Often design advocacy is through inaccessible awards programs, but it starts by taking it down to the block, the block and the neighborhood scale. This allows for greater conversations around design, space, and access to space, and access to funds to create the space itself. So we had to look at a way that where previously pre-pandemic, the city was funding public plazas and placemaking at like $100,000 or $50,000 per year. They're putting in $2, $3, $5 million total now and funding individual projects up to 250 and sometimes $500,000. So that's when a city changes how much they fund neighborhood and placemaking projects, that shows that they're valued, they matter, and they have an impact. So that's a huge shift that has happened in Chicago over the last 2 years. And I think similar initiatives are happening in Baltimore as well. As I mentioned early on, one of the ideas that we were also looking at was how do we aggregate all these amazing projects together? They're in a way that people could find them, because Chicago is spread. We have a geographic spread. Sometimes you might not know a project exists on the west side, or if you live on the south side, or you might not know that the organization that created the project, you might not be connected to them. So how could you connect to them to start to share resources about how that project was created, made, or what pitfalls it might have had? And those are invaluable resources that we started to want to put together in what we call Mapped. This is a new website, a research website that we just launched a couple weeks ago. It stands for Making a People's Pathway for Engaging Design. And this allows for projects, community-based projects of various typologies, urban design, placemaking, research documents, so on and so forth, to be input into the website. All the kind of team and award and location information and pictures to be uploaded to it, and then a map categorizing it by typology, neighborhood, a designer, all putting that out on this mapped website to start to show where these projects exist. And that we want this to become a database of various types of community-based projects within the city of Chicago. And I've been slowly uploading projects and having map-a-thons with different firms and different groups of people every month throughout the remainder of the year to put more projects, plans, and organizations into this database so people can use it and hopefully make a connection or learn more information, because they actually have access to the information. And then finally, I like to talk about, the process. So it started in November of 2020, right? So this is where we started to, we had funding secured, and we ended up getting a fiscal sponsor. And these are all the tasks that between Paula, and myself that we took on over that first year. We called 2021 our prototype year, because we, again, as I mentioned, we were fortunate to have funding for 3 years up front. So we can experiment with what worked, what didn't, try many different things, launch different types of projects, launch research projects, and then see what works in terms of an operations flow for a nonprofit organizations for a design center that ultimately would bring on new employees and then transition the founders, the three of us, out to be so that the employees can be running a sustainable community design organization. And that's where we're at. We just brought on our first employee, a community designer. We have a second one coming on, our operations manager, hopefully in a month or so. And we're starting to hit all of these milestones that we set out to look at to grow an org over a 3-year time. And with that, I want to thank you for letting me share a little bit of what's really was our extra side project. It's the outside of the architecture firm of Latent, which is 7 people, and we have projects from working with the Mayo Clinic, the City of Chicago, high rises, and a variety of community organizations. At the same time, we also started a non-for-profit, which seems antithetical, like why do another design thing? But we really see it as the basis of what's really needed in Chicago to address some of our systemic community and public space design inaccessibilities that we have within the city. And so we wanted to take the time to be able to create that, set up the framework, and hopefully have an organization that grows for another 5, 10, 20 years over time. And with that, I think I will hand it over to Rebecca to share her screen and talk a little bit more about what she's seen on her end.
Let's hope this works. Okay, share screen. Here we go. Are we being successful? Share. Has everyone seen the screen?
It's loading, so I think give it another second.
Okay. You. Slide. Any luck?
No,
see the
try to
black screen.
reshare again. So close out and try and reshare again.
Resume share. I do have it open this time. Let me see if we technical issues. Hang on. Stop share your resume share. Any luck?
No.
No. Resume share, stop share. Randy, do you want to try pulling it up? And I don't know why this is not resume share. Let me stop share and then let's try it all over again. Share screen. Here we go. Share. Your screen. Resume share. No luck?
I'm queued up if you need me to.
I think you better because I'm, there we go. Well, Catherine, can everyone hear me? Catherine, thank you. As I commend you for you and the two others starting a nonprofit, an amazing effort and work to appeal to the needs of what's happening in Chicago. So I was very impressed by what y'all have created. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to take a little different spin. Artie Jones, interior architectural firm. We do not do base building. We really are totally interiors. We have registered architects on staff to actually help to develop all of these interiors. Most of our work, I'd say 80%, is new construction. We've been so fortunate to work with so many great architects in the Baltimore area and kind of architects all over the U.S. But we've got Ford Copeland Mind, Design Collective, BCT, KTGYs in Virginia. And I've selected many of the slides I'd like to talk about is what happened through the pandemic. We have always been primarily all in hospitality, doing hotels, restaurants. We've jumped into multifamily, and that literally carried us through the pandemic, as well as senior living and even some student housing. So it's been a very unique process to understand how strong multifamily has become. Not everybody can travel, but they definitely have to live somewhere. So a lot of this conversation today, and I'm thrilled to be able, to talk to you about this, is the collaboration of working with architects. Now, Randy, are we just to talk? Can we move into next slide? How am I going to do this?
All right.
Okay, and we're really talking about creating these grand amenities for these projects for people to experience. We're going from the exterior placemaking that Katherine was talking about to really focusing solely on the interiors. But what is, I think, the beauty of architects, ID, MEP, structural, all the consultants that come together, it takes, it takes a village to make all this happen. If we can move to the next slide. So I have selected, can you move, is that movable? There we go. I've selected a whole smattering of different projects, starting with ones in Baltimore, to really talk about what it takes to make all of this work. And I know interiors seems sometimes secondary to the base building architecture, but I'm a huge proponent of of people being able to experience interior spaces, to feel it, touch it, and it creates a sense of place and a sense of home for so many people. To work with and create these spaces, it really is creating that team effort. And it starts from the very beginning that everybody gets on the same page working together to see the vision and bring in interiors in early. So we're not changing what the work that everybody's always done. You're starting at the very beginning to create, reshape the space. And it is the efforts for moving columns, coordinating with the MEP, everything is just so important to make all of this happen. This job delivered about 4 years ago. It is opening the doors. You're seeing the scale, the detail, the fixtures. Lots of VE was happening on this job as well. And again, team effort to work with everybody to make this happen. But you're going to hear touch points about all of this through what has happened in the pandemic, that just as far as deliveries and being able to meet deadlines that everyone's experiencing. So I will talk about that throughout. But what I'm wanting to share is, we can advance to the next slide, is the collaboration of as well as with artists. This was Jeff Huntington. He was a street artist that was doing the work on the exterior. We brought him in. We literally had him painting this image of Billie Holiday, which had somewhat of a tragic life. We found a whole story behind her, painted in the green, that it kind of really reflected her lifestyle and the things that happened. So that became the Instagrammable moment, which I think we always tried to find in the interior work. You're seeing the scale, the shape, the size, exposed ceilings. And again, that takes so much collaboration with the, with the architect and MEP to pull all this together. Next slide. This goes in the co-working space that has been, become more and more popular with everybody working from home, is creating places for people to get out of their small apartments, find fun places that are really functional. People are to be seen and be a part of it, but still they're there to work. So utilizing these spaces, this is connecting to fitness area, again, utilizing the art, utilizing concrete, steel, and wood that's carried throughout. Gutierrez, and I must commend, you will see a ton of work at Gutierrez Studios over at Clipper Mill. It's been a huge part of nearly every job we do. They are a brilliant fabricator. And again, a team effort. Everything clearly takes a team effort to make all this come together. Next slide. This is Union Wharf, which was, I will say, and I will give this one a credit, it was with Horde Couple-Mott, Bizzuto. When the moon and the stars all come together, everybody had the vision, and I've never seen a project go so well together. I apologize, I'm on site at a photo shoot here, that everybody was working in the same direction. and having an architect that was open to ideas, open to making changes and putting jewel boxes at the end next to the harbor. It was all a very special moment. You're seeing the quality level of the furniture, the details that also affect the interiors. Interiors is not just about decorating the space, we are shaping the space. And that's why it is so critical to work with the architects to, I call it barter. I'll give me this space, I'll give you back that space. So we can really make all the adjacencies, the flow and the operations work together. Next. So this is coming off the elevator, just looking through, it's a donut. There was, we had a structural shear wall. We were able to cut a hole through so you can peek through to the other side. Go to the next slide. And this room was an outdoor patio, did not exist. And in working together in a vision, we said at night when the harbor's dark, let's have a jewel box at the end that faces the harbor. So at night this glows. I'm not sure how many have been to this site, but it's a wonderful connection to Fells Point, to the harbor lights. It's quite a jewel. Next. Even down to, you know, mail rooms that, you know, I'm showing you lots of things that interiors affect. Everybody has to go to their mail room once in a while. So we wrapped structural steel cables holding up the mailboxes, or appeared to be holding up the mailboxes around the elevator core. We salvaged wood from the racetracks and held it for 2 years and had it all cleaned, the Rosecroft racetrack, and had it all cleaned up. So doing interiors a lot, it's find unique, unusual pieces to incorporate in there and have the artisans to work with you and help create the vision. And so I encourage more architects to, you know, help understand more interiors and want to get involved in more interiors because they're highly, highly detailed. Next slide, please. Even down to the fitness centers, graphics. The rear graphic was just found our first on-site when we were, this used to be the old warehouses down in Fells Point with the cobblestone and the tracks going through. We saved it, we turned it into a graphic to put on there to really illustrate what was, you know, what really existed here beforehand. Next. So this is, when I'm talking about this great space, this is a project that, again, that we did with Horde Copeland down to the ballpark at Nat Stadium. And the beauty of working with very talented architects is allowing us to have great space. They understand the vision of giving us double heights. This was total retail on the first level, so we only had a sliver space to get everyone up to the club area. So it's so important when architects are, you know, before we are even on board, to actually start having the vision of having a great space to work with that we can then reshape throughout. We have belvederes that we floated in between the two openings. Since this was next to the ballpark, we wanted to have stadium seating. We always want to try to do something fun and combine everything together. Next slide. So this is just as you transition up, big open spaces. This served us very well during COVID because of the very openness of the space. Next slide. So they're seeing belvederes, great little working space, lighting. And I, you know, must say, Mike Noon, Palindrome Lighting, was very involved on all of these projects that you'll see. Lighting is such a huge component to making these spaces come alive and create warmth to them, and bringing lighting low to really create intimacy and comfort. Next. Even down to the fitness areas, we're looking at this is just a literally glass box. We put all the emphasis with color, exposed, create some fun, energizing, exposed ductwork and everything on the ceiling with circular lights. And you'll see throughout, the lighting and the custom lighting are, again, a huge part of what happens. The graphics become a huge part of what happens. We'll go to the next one. So this was working with Design Collective. I had a wonderful experience there. Again, I thought they were brilliant on providing us a space that was center of a building that was on an entire block. We got a center entrance. What you're seeing is coming in from the center. You got the concierge desk. And we always try to find history, which is fun, and researching what was there. So Philadelphia used to be known for its furniture making. And we have parts and pieces of 3x3 panels of old furniture parts assembled on one wall, create a fabulous texture. Next. And then, just giving us double height space, going to the elevator core, back to the mailroom. Lots of drama, giving us the ability to engage and wrap a stair around a fireplace, put a slit in the fireplace so you could see through it. It's kind of fascinating. If you look into the wall, there's all these graphics or graffiti on the wall, and they utilized it. I thought it was a brilliant way to keep what was existing and then modernize it with the perforated panels. Next. And that gives you a little bit better sight line of what was happening there. So just wonderful space that we were provided to create these interiors with. Next. The panels, and this is an urban, this is very interesting that this was the first building we ever did that had no garage. And in Center City, Philly has worked incredibly well and continues to work incredibly well. But just the connection to a small outdoor space with fireplaces, TVs, all the fun things that goes together. But we work, again, I can't say enough how we work so closely together to coordinate the lighting, the detail, the panels, bring the outside materials in. Next. And I had spoken earlier about the brilliance of the architecture here. This building, it was one block deep. They put the center entrance so they could have retail and restaurants on the two end pieces facing the Walnut and don't recall the other street. They put the fitness area as a kind of portal that you could drive through and bridged over that. And then we're showing the fitness area on the inside. So it was just I think a wonderful expression of how to literally use space and create great space. Next. This was done Hickok Cole. That again, bringing we always love as an interiors group to take the exterior facade, the design that you've done, and try to pull it to the inside. We want to make this seamless between the two disciplines, so it looks as one. This was done in Noma. It's kind of raw, very industrial, but a cool vibe, young energy, multifamily. Actually having fishes in the background as you walk in, and we flip to the next. And then you see a kind of broader expanse. This was all on one ground plane. And I think it was beautiful working with landscape, and I haven't mentioned landscape. They're also such an important part the, team effort to work together. And so much of this discussion really is how much respect and that all disciplines can and should have for each other, because everyone brings something brilliant to the table, and collaborating together, it's amazing what you can create and come up with. So if we go to the next slide, you're seeing all these 10-foot diameter, 10-foot high, 52-inch diameter fixtures. That is a great sight line from the courtyard coming in, just fun, playful furniture, sculptures by Adams, that's out of Baltimore. He's an architect himself, but a sculptor on the side, did brilliant work for us here. Next. And then this is just creating the nooks and crannies to have compression in the ceilings, that there's units above. And again, I go to the effort of the architect saying, giving us that double height space, co-working, that we have, you can do co-working in there, and using art, funky, crazy art that really engages all the spaces. Next. Club room, double-sided fireplaces everywhere. That is a huge coordination with MEP, and I say God bless all the engineers and MEP that can find ways to exhaust these high, powerful fireplaces. And we're trying to find the feel of a design that allows these interiors to have lasting character, just as the exteriors do. Next. So this is a project I'm currently sitting in. This is a collaboration with Martin Architectural Group and Stephen Schwartz. I am on site as we speak right now. This was to be the flagship of Bozzuto, which is a local developer to Baltimore, and based out of Greenbelt. It is a true result of a collaboration with the architects. This is Gutierrez, again, that is creating all these fabulous structural staircases that come in, 3-story curved staircase that goes up with steel that goes all the way through. We always laugh. It's much more fun to sketch, and then trying to figure out how to execute this on a curved wall has been most interesting. But it's the ability in design to go from traditional to contemporary to funky to gritty. Interiors are fun, and they are. It just takes so much joined effort. This one I do speak of is opening during COVID. The challenges that we have all faced in getting this project open. It was a year delayed. Could not get appliances, could not get finishes, could not get lighting. I think what I do speak to of learned experiences now, that we will on all, whether it's any level interiors, we are recommending that you're ordering your FF&E and materials, lighting, rugs, carpet a year in advance to assure that they will be there for opening and not making deliveries. We do have a purchasing company that is dealing with this on a daily basis. Interiors are so infused with, having to bring all the details in together and everything arrive and show up all in 1 week. Next. These are just some more viewpoints, coordinating with details, the old and the new, taking found out items of old mill wheels found out in the fields in Pennsylvania against a very lush contemporary background. It's really just a mixture of old and new. Cochrane Lumber, Andy Evans, a fabulous resource for sourcing the unusual for us, right? Based in Baltimore. There's so much talent in Baltimore. It's pretty amazing. Next. And so these are just showing you the coordination again with every discipline between, having a 3-story fire separation panel that comes down to cover all this, to carrying the structure, the marble, and actually even the marble fabricator was out of Baltimore. You're just having the combination of the lights and the darks, and again, Gutierrez. And I'm promoting all these craftsmen because I do say for the interiors, it does take very talented craftsmen, and Baltimore is full of them, to be able to execute and find these wonderful things that we draw and create. Go next. This is just showing you more of the staircase looking down on the right side, and the level of detail to execute this. I never would have dreamed we would have this so much to do to make this happen. So it is a challenge. Just some shots of the interiors with all the furnishings. Go next. And this is a lot what's happening right now, converting office space. We are being engaged with many people since no one's going to the offices and they have these office buildings with not knowing what to do with them. This is a conversion of an office space to multifamily. So this is the before, this is our renderings that we're creating from that. Using the bridge, we are just, this is, I will say, much more of a facial coating, but to create the new attitude and feel, to make it feel much more like a hotel hospitality lobby, with retail being the removing some ground floor levels to create retail for restaurants back in there. And it's, it's a transformation from office to multi for this. Go to the next. This is what we had upstairs for, they had a kind of open social conference room for that. And then the next slide shows the direction where it's headed. So I think this is a lot of what, interiors on renovation work has the ability to totally transform spaces. And it is all through design, details, furnishings, color, contrast, and materials that really makes all of these spaces fun. Hang on, what happened here? Next. And that's just another viewpoint going into the entertainment kitchens, outdoor pool areas. And we even converted and put an outdoor pool in. And then the co-working boom. That's another thing that we are doing, if we can advance to the next slide, that we are doing multifamily and attaching co-working spaces to these buildings. This is a project that we're doing down in Dallas. This is the in partnership with the Texas Rangers. This is their old office space that is being converted to co-working. Fun, playful. Spark is a Baltimore-based company owned by Cordish in Baltimore, and we are cutting holes into their the floor plate so we can have the Belvedere that they could go up with the green and the crazy lights, and just having a multitude of different spaces to work and shape it. Definitely has a strong hospitality feel to the overall marketplace. And I think as a few more, this is just, lounge spacing. They're putting beer taps in, and just, having art and elements to create the mood. So this is down in my home state of Texas, but we're doing work all over. And I just highly encourage architects to, that we all work together beautifully to create amazing spaces from the outside and in. I'm going to throw in one, I believe we got the outdoor living. So this is the co-working space that's going to be right across the block for this. This is a space that we're doing with Horde Couple and Mott. And I think this is an incredible example of what has happened with during the pandemic. They want more outdoor space. And I will say this is pretty much over the top. So you can see the overall view of the building. And these are all Horde Coupland's renderings. So but we work very closely with them as the interiors, working out all of the living spaces and the cabanas and the turf selections and sculptures. And again, this is their landscape group as well as their architecture as well as us. And it's always a wonderful relationship to get excited and everybody join forces. We even have outdoor bars, if you can go to the next slide, with huge screen TVs, because the Texas Rangers are involved in this one. That's indoor, outdoor, just like you would be. It looks like the water's missing from here, but it's there. And, in Texas, the big shaded areas, but it is not, this was just not about landscape. It was about the whole team to bring this together for that. And then you have your barbecue areas. It's expansive. You do have the right temperature zones to go 12 seasons or 12 months out of the year to expand to it. But this is really, not only are we doing it for this project, we're doing it for most projects to have expansive outdoor spaces with fire pits and heating elements to give that openness and space. That's what's really trending for all of this. And that, I believe, just a few more views, the outdoor bars, and this is the bringing local artists in, just like Katherine was showing on her sites, bringing local artists in to do the murals, do the art, do the, having the lighting, the fun, the playfulness, and it's all about human experiences and keeping people feeling positive and feeling great about their living circumstances, because that's where people are spending most of their time. So on that note, that shows the overall. So I conclude in just showing you so many different opportunities for interiors, architecture, landscape, MEP. It takes the village, it takes the team to work together, and I appreciate every firm that we have worked with. Because it really, the results are amazing and experiential. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rebecca and Katherine. It seems like the outside work, we're dealing with paint, and inside you have so many other materials. And I'm going to start with, I have some questions to start until we start getting questions coming on board. Katherine, first one's for Katherine. The first book I read about architecture when I was in high school was called After the Planners, and it was about advocacy planning. And so it's only been recently that I've been able to be involved in a neighborhood design center, but I really have a lot of respect for you starting your program and what you're trying to do. The Baltimore's Design Center has been around since 1968, I think. So, which is, I think, right before that book was written. I have a question, but my question for you is, are you familiar with an architect in England, Carl Turner, who does these meanwhile spaces? And he takes kind of what we've been doing with Neighborhood Design Center and what looks like what you're doing in the city in Chicago. And it isn't just recreational spaces, but he puts in these low impact developments. So there might be a cafe or a bar or restaurants that come in. One is called Pop Brixton. We had a lecturer a few years ago show some of that. And wondering if anything like that is happening, where you're going to get kind of meanwhile development into the community that would allow the activity and to be able to build up the market, so to speak, for more development. Or are we only trying to fill in? Are we only trying to fill in spaces?
Yeah, I think at the core with Meanwhile Spaces, there's a lot of what's happening within the public space programs here in Chicago, because you need the Meanwhile Spaces to make the permanent spaces.
Right.
And then in what's happening in that meantime, it's not about just the activation and the beautification of it. There is, which I strongly believe, form follows insurance and form follows policy. And so what we have to look at is, for some of those small businesses and the spaces, they're not allowed to exist because our current business licensing zoning codes didn't think of them when they were created 50, right, 60, whatever years ago. So that is critical to taking a Meanwhile space and turning it into something permanent. Is you have to couple very smart design with very good policy to be able to make new spaces exist in both form and function and activity.
So one follow-up on that is, what are you seeing from the pandemic as far as how these outside spaces are being used? Are you seeing a going back to normal? And are you seeing, you were talking about some of these temporary spaces becoming more permanent. So I know in Baltimore, we've accommodated parking spaces in a lot of places, and it's worked well for outdoor seating, for restaurants, but the materials aren't long-term materials. So is there any of that kind of work that's been done to make it more permanent, making these things more architectural and more tectonic, more
Yeah, there are. It depends. There's a whole variety of how does something temporary become permanent. Some are looking at permanency as activating true development and putting buildings on those sites, because you've been able to, many of these sites are city owned. So it's trying to, really wrestle land and ownership and ideas from the city into the public realm where they could actually grow better than when they're being stewarded by the city. The city, our planning department, is the largest landowner in the city of Chicago, so far exceeds the related Midwest, the CBREs, all of those developers combined. And so that's the area where we kind of push and prod to think about how temporary can lead into permanent spaces. It gets tricky when you think about permanent public space, because it does need a steward. And we know the city isn't a great steward. Parks doesn't want anything. They don't want any new park spaces. So they don't want to touch these at all, So plazas exist with our Department of Transportation, and they're terrible stewards of public space, because they're about trains and cars getting places, and sometimes bikes if you catch them on a good day. But, it's really about who becomes a good steward for these spaces. And some of it needs to go into community land trusts, into equitable development organizations, or part of community benefits agreements. So that's, as I mentioned before, that's part of the parallel policy and kind of ownership process that needs to happen in tandem and just as equally with the design process.
I'm gonna I think there's a couple of comments so far. Let's see, here's a question for Rebecca, and it just popped up. It says, do you try to use local sustainable materials, or do you design to any sustainable standards such as LEED or WELL?
We do. The requirements on interiors are much lighter to meet the qualifications, but when and where we can, we do that. I will say that there's been a push on recycling of materials that we, like I mentioned on Union Wharf, that we did from the Rose Cross racetracks. It is more challenging because we are to get some of the scale and the custom things that we do. It does not lead itself that strongly to all those type of materials. But we do when we can. And we are actually working on a project in Wheaton that does, it's going to be highly required for that.
A lot of your spaces from the slideshow that you showed are really they're volumetric. I mean, you said 2 stories, but they look like some of them are 3 stories.
Some of them are 3, yes.
And your fixtures are scaled. There's almost an urban feeling to them in a way. It's sort of like an urban space in the interior, an exterior space of the interior. But your fixtures are so large. Are they all custom fixtures? Or are they?
I
Where
would
do
say
you get
they're
these 5 foot, 10 foot tall by 50-inch fixtures?
They're not any kind, most everything is custom. Most everything is coming from overseas. There are a few manufacturers stateside that we are been tapping into, but the prices are more substantial. The tariffs coming in, a lot of people have moved from China to Indonesia to Philippines to create these things. Most everything you see in our work is all custom just to meet code. Durability, if I use Union Wharf as a perfect example, it's 13 years old now, and the furniture is performing incredibly well because it's built, for this, is built to hotel standards. And to get the size and the scale for most everything, it requires custom.
I saw that there's another comment. It says, beautiful places and spaces. I'm not an architect or designer. I used to work in city planning in England. Such talented people doing this work. Thank you. So I think that's for both of you. Let's see. Another question for Rebecca is what's your plan for the Design Trust? Is this something that you will sort of launch and then you'll be involved in your practice, or how does this integrate with your practice?
Yeah, so my practice is full-time, and as I said, we're a boutique firm with 7 employees currently. It's a bad idea to do 2 full-time jobs at once, but that is what we did with launching Design Trust. And so the goal of it is to create an organization and a system that allows for us as the 3 co-founders to transition out from day to day to check in to then advisory, and then have a sustainable pool of employees, design partners, and then projects to that support the organization moving forward. Because our goal and our kind of barometer is to become the neighborhood design center that you already have in Baltimore. We reference it all the time. It's always on when we give a presentation and have what are reference organizations for people to know, because it always shocks them when we say there is no community design center like this in Chicago. We just put it up there. It's like this is what we're talking about. This is what we're trying to get to. So yes, so right now it's just double the work. And how it ties into the practice is there are many times there are projects that come to us that need to be baked a little bit further before they could apply for a grant or things like that. And there are projects and organizations that don't have enough funding right now to support our work. And we fall in the same trap where we might not have the resources or the free time to do it. But if you set up an organization that you could start to refer people to that has both grant funding and then full fee or pro bono services covered, then that starts to create a loop, because otherwise these projects, the idea dies somewhere and it doesn't get resurrected or just completely dies. The other thing that we're seeing, and it's part of the the tragedy of abundance right now, is there is a lot of funding for community-based planning, placemaking, and project work coming out of our city. And it's being allocated through an incredibly competitive process in terms of the application process. And so while the application might seem simple and say, like, tell us about your project, write 50 words, 500 words, it's so competitive that you need the idea already fully baked with renderings, with plans, with a timeline. You need to have actually the pre-development work done for that community-based project, even as simple as a parklet or a community corner garden space to even be competitive to get those funds. Because the last round of public space grants for the alfresco program was up to $500,000 available, but they're receiving thousands of applications, and many of them, just many community orgs look at the application and say, this is what the city's asking for us, and we don't need to give them any more, but they don't know behind the scenes that they're almost immediately eliminated just by giving the minimum that's being asked of them.
Kelly and I are both on the board of the NDC right now. I don't know if there have been interactions with the NDC and your design trust, but it might be interesting if we could, we could get Jen Gold to, and do like sharing, like the share of, because our staff, they have a lot of different projects they share with the board, and it might be great to kind of share what you're doing, what we're doing. There. On that note, though, I'm going to jump. This question will be for you too, but I'm going to jump over to Rebecca, and it'll be the same question. What changes have you seen in your practice or process because of the pandemic?
You're on mute, Rebecca.
Oops.
The design-related changes are really a push to, as I would say, two things: more co-working space within, and more outdoor space. That has really been the drivers. Also, apartment units becoming larger because people are needing more workspace even within their unit. So those are things I'm seeing trending. From a practice standpoint, I'm finding, to speak to it, we are doing less with more. Or doing more with less, excuse me, more with, we are, at the scale of our firm, we're down to 35 people. We used to be up to 50. We are feeling that to be able to produce the quality level is so hands-on that it's hard to grow. So we are taking a much different approach and saying we're delivering the high quality service to our clients, and giving the level of detail and time, and being really upfront with the clients about deadlines and what we can handle and what we can't. And it's, I think there's a very high level of very openness that has happened amongst clients, and understanding and open forms of communication that I think has been very positive through all of this. We are able not to travel don't have to travel all over the US due to, Zoom and these wonderful technology, and saving a tremendous amount of time to really work on projects versus traveling. So I think it's all been positive, great attitudes with the staff, and people really wanting to come in and work hard and be creative. So it's all been, yes, it was a difficult time period that we all went through. Lots of bumps and bruises along the way, but I think the excitement for, I think, most everyone, it's a incredibly healthy activities with new projects, new work, great new work, large work. And as long as we can keep this economy going, I think that it's a bright future for all of us.
My experience was we've walked in some projects at the end of construction last year, and half the furniture was in storage because, it was spread all over the place, and there was taped circles. And did you not have that? I mean, that seemed to be like the going for us.
It was a nightmare until we finally, I think what happened, the construction had delays, and therefore had the construction been on time, yes, we would have had the same issues. We have learned through this process, and that's what I mentioned earlier in our talk, that we are literally ordering a year in advance. Sounds crazy, but purchase orders are being dropped, and maybe it's sitting in a warehouse longer. But like the job I'm sitting in right now, we installed in 4 days, all in, everything set in place. There's a few, there's only one item that got broken and everything is in great shape, but it's how to work within the system now. And it's not easy, but it's planning. And I trying to get owners to actually understand this is probably our biggest challenge that we're going into, saying you cannot wait. You have to have your funding, everything in place, whether it's material, construction materials, anything. Nothing's available.
And for you, Katherine, same question. How has it changed your practice and you're running the design trust and growing the design trust?
Yeah, so from a practice standpoint, as Rebecca said, we've seen some of the similar issues. In a positive spin to that, it has been helpful to have that discussion up front around, let's properly schedule and coordinate this project under the conditions that we know. And sometimes that forces clients to make earlier decisions than they want, but it ends up being a challenge that can make projects better, is what we've seen. And it's been a more fruitful collaboration, I think, between owners, architects, contractors, and anyone on the interiors team that we might have. I think also what we saw for our public space project with the Mayo Clinic, where we're redesigning all the public space in downtown Rochester, Minnesota. It was interesting because we started the project and the design pre-pandemic. And we were already thinking about infectious disease, how people gather, different cultures that how people gather. When you go to the Mayo, you're coming from a global audience, and some people come with just themselves. Some people come with an entourage. And you could either be getting the best or the worst news of your life on that day that you're visiting the Mayo. And so what does that look like for a contemplative, private, and also social public space all at once? What we found is, because we were thinking about this truly in a universal and kind of global design aspect, when kind of this layer of infectious disease and COVID diameters and distances came into play, we found that we didn't have to redesign anything in our public space, because thinking about it from that kind of global, cultural, and spatial lens in both physical mobility through public spaces, different cultural interactions in public space, that we were already then inadvertently and unknowingly addressing safe spaces during for COVID precautions. And I think that was for us validation that, and even for the client, that while really having this broad perspective turned out to resolve a myriad of issues that they weren't even thinking of to start the project. In our firm specifically, what we started to do is we'll remain a hybrid first firm. We liked it. I think our staff likes it. We come in between 2 and 3 days a week in office, and then everything else is virtual. Obviously that shifts around deadlines or different things, that it's just easier to talk through a concept and work through issues side by side, over a couple hours versus trying to do it in Slack. But we found it really helps with employee retention too, because many individuals that we're hiring are seeking hybrid first. And we found that it worked well, even for me and my productivity level, to have flexibility. We are a professional development fund. Most firms have a professional development stipend that they offer to their employees. We've converted that to also be allowed as any emergency funds that someone might need. We converted that during 2020 when various employees had different issues that, in a family they might have to take care of, or you're looking at mutual aid for a friend or family member. And so we allowed that to happen and kept that in place as well. So there's always, you could use it for professional development or no questions asked, mutual aid or support. We also trust our employees enough to know that they're not asking for, $500 to go to, Miami for the weekend. So, I think that also speaks to the type of culture we have at the office to be able to have those types of amenities and kind of shift our practice of what was, your normal, this is what a typical office and design practice does, to say this is what, maybe a practice that thinks a little bit more broadly and had to be challenged by all of these difficult considerations. How could we be a better firm, a better boss, and create a better company because of it?
So you don't have any employees who are totally remote.
No, not
everybody has to
yeah.
be in.
Not now. We were fully remote for a while, but then people, maybe about 6 months in, were getting bored of being home too. In Chicago, I don't know if it's like this in Baltimore, but in the winter, I think everyone wants to be remote in the winter. And then as it starts to get nicer, I get more people.
That
And then
makes
I think once it gets summer, they'll end up being remote again because it might be just too nice to come in. So we're a very fair weather office if we'd allow that to be, but we have kind of structured team days for collaboration and in office work.
And how about you, Rebecca? You have any totally remote employees?
We have two totally remote, just trying, looking for talent, and they're not local. And so we have one in Wisconsin, and one that just is in Frederick, but doesn't want to come in, but a great resource. So I think talent is our biggest challenge that we're all facing. Is we just need more. We need more architects. We need more designers. We need more staff, and it's just very, very, very difficult to to come by. So that is, I think our biggest topics that we share amongst all our peers of saying, where did everybody go, and how do we get them back? We're in a fabulous, wonderful field that we're in. It does have its challenges with real estate, the ups and downs of the economy, but I just feel like we're also lucky to be doing what we do, because it's so passionate that we're very lucky to enjoy a craft that we have.
Okay, we have one last question. It's anonymous, but it says that the Neighborhood Design Center had a program that was called Design for Distancing, and it was planning for the outdoor spaces, and I'm wondering, it looks like some of the things that you've done are similar. The Neighborhood Design Center did have a publication that was printed, a book that was published for the whole program. Do you know of any other cities that have done programs like Chicago and Baltimore?
Yeah, I know New York, the Design Trust for Public Space, and the AAA New York chapter, they launched a whole public space initiative. I think it was also with like Urban Omnibus as well. There was a kind of big collaboration between multiple design organizations, but I'm forgetting the name of it, of course, right when you started talking. We learned a lot from them and kind of did some peer sharing because we wanted to bring examples from that program to Chicago. We also know like LA and San Francisco had different programs, and then across the city, I think various scales of cities implemented like the very easily accessible of like parklets or outdoor public space, or just like cordoning off a street for a little bit more of distance and outdoor dining. So I feel a lot of it went towards, and this is how it started in Chicago, was going towards outdoor dining, and saying we can't be indoors at a certain time in kind of the pandemic. It was like, let's be outdoors. And so it was creating space outdoors, and then that started to allow more programming to be layered on top of that. And so that's what we saw, and we're still learning lessons from cities who are looking at this, like how they've formalized it, or how they've expanded, or how they've pulled away. We also see cities as like, okay, we didn't mind that you were taking over our parallel parking spots for a year and a half, but now we want them back because the businesses that are fully open. So you're also seeing how that arc of kind of acceptance shifts over time.
Thank you, Katherine, and thank you, Rebecca. This was really great. I think there was a contrast between the two presentations, which I thought was mind-bending for me. So, and once again, thank you so much, and we really appreciate you contributing to this lecture series. Also, I need to thank our annual sponsors. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you for AI Baltimore for putting up the list of annual sponsors. And let's see, if you were watching and attending, please don't forget to fill out your form. Thank you all for joining AI Baltimore and Baltimore Architectural Foundation for the lecture tonight. Currently, we appreciate you. It's called, the title was currently, I'm sorry. We appreciate your continued support as we continue in this digital sphere. Hopefully we'll be out of this and we'll be back in real life soon, so that when we have guests like Katherine and from out of town, we can actually give you a little tour and stop in and see the Neighborhood Design Center. Anyway, thank you very much. Take care. We're gonna say goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.